Hi, I'm a possum and I find garbage. This garbage is Red 1, an action comedy about rescuing Santa Claus, starring Dwayne Johnson playing the same character he always plays. It's utterly mid, and I have very little to say about the movie itself, but what I want to talk about is how absurd movie budgets have gotten. This movie cost $250 million to make. It's an action comedy about rescuing Santa Claus, and they spent $250 million on it like they expected it to do Avengers numbers. And $50 million of that was Dwayne Johnson's salary. Yes, an entire fifth of this movie's budget went to one actor. Wow, big actors bring in audiences. Oh well, I see how well that worked out. At what point does it stop being worth it to hire these big-name actors? Did they really expect Dwayne Johnson's involvement to raise the box office enough to cover an additional $50 million on top of the $200 million they were already investing? When you factor in things like marketing costs, distribution, and theater take, a movie generally has to make at least double whatever the production budget was just to break even. So what would have been a $200 million movie would have needed to gross $400 million at the box office just to make back what they spent on it. But if they're paying one guy $50 million to be in it, thus raising the budget to $250 million, it now has to make $500 million to break even. That means Dwayne Johnson's involvement would have to raise the box office by at least $100 million just to cover the cost of hiring him. And that's just to break even. To be considered a success, it would have to make considerably more than that. It's not like Dwayne Johnson is some foolproof box office draw who's guaranteed to make anything he's in a smash hit. He has been in movies that flopped, some as recent as Jungle Cruise in 2021 and Black Adam in 2022. Even Fast X, which made $714 million worldwide, was considered a disappointment because it cost $340 million to make. And that movie had the advantage of a pre-existing fan base. Now, I'm no marketing expert, but I really don't think an action comedy about rescuing Santa Claus was ever gonna make anywhere near that. It's ridiculous how much movies cost now and how much actors get paid. We're at the point where a movie is considered a moderate success if it makes $700 million. Every big movie has to make close to $1 billion to justify its existence now, and that simply isn't realistic, especially with all the competition movies have now from television and things like YouTube and TikTok. And the fact that inflation is ruining everyone's lives and they can't afford to spend upwards of $100 buying movie tickets and snacks for the families when staying home and jacking off is free. To give you an idea of how bad things have gotten, Disney lost over a combined $700 million on their theatrical releases in 2023. And we're talking about huge franchise films like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and The Marvels, which, regardless of how bad they were, would have been successful based on brand recognition alone if they came out just 5 years ago. If you look at something like Godzilla Minus One, which also came out in 2023, that movie made $116 million worldwide, and it only cost $15 million to make. So it made back nearly 8 times what they spent on it. And that's not even an extreme example. A Quiet Place came out in 2018, cost $17 million to make, and grossed $341 million. That's a 20-time return on investment. And that was despite it being an original IP and not a sequel or remake. Godzilla Minus One has no actors who would be recognizable to Western audiences, and the biggest actor in A Quiet Place was Emily Blunt, who's nowhere near as famous as Dwayne Johnson, yet both of those movies had a much better profit-to-budget ratio than anything he's done recently. Instead of spending $200 to $300 million on a single movie and hoping it makes $1 billion, Hollywood would be better off making more modestly budgeted movies in the $10 to $20 million range, which only have to make $30 to $50 million to be profitable. This would also allow them to take more creative risks, since they wouldn't have hundreds of millions of dollars riding on a single production that has to appeal to as many people as possible in multiple countries. And they wouldn't have to pay a single actor multiple tens of millions of dollars just so they can use their face to draw into evidently imaginary audiences who pay to see a movie just because so-and-so was in it. This is such an obvious solution that the fact that they don't do it makes me wonder if it's all intentional. Like they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on movies they know will flop, because it's all being done for money laundering or tax scams or something. No industry that consistently produces failures of this magnitude can stay in business if they're honest. Alright, I'm just going to explain what happens in the movie since none of you are going to watch it anyway. The movie starts with a main character as a kid trying to convince his cousins that Santa Claus isn't real, Then we flash forward to 30 years later and see him as an adult played by Chris Evans, as he steals a woman's coffee so he can pour it onto a power strip to light a gazebo on fire to create a distraction so he can steal a woman's workplace key card and break into some building, but not before tripping a guy who's trying to put the fire out and then stealing a lollipop from a baby in a stroller. So the movie goes out of its way to establish the protagonist as an unlikable criminal who hurts innocent people and literally steals candy from babies, all to show that he's good at making things up as he goes so he can steal things. This is a skill which I don't recall him ever using again for the rest of the movie. I don't remember what he steals, but we later see him talking to someone on the phone at some kind of seismic monitoring station, where he sees seismic activity on a monitor and tells the mysterious voice the coordinates in exchange for some huge amount of money. He doesn't know it yet, but it turns out he detected the location of Santa's workshop at the North Pole, which is depicted as a huge company town in this movie. While Santa Claus, played by J.K. Simmons, prepares for Christmas, which is in 2 days, Dwayne Johnson, who plays his bodyguard, realizes he's been kidnapped and a big chase ensues. He manages to catch the weird snowmobile truck thing, but it turns out to be a diversion, and now Dwayne Johnson has to find out where Santa Claus is. Dwayne Johnson and the organization he works for, ELF, somehow figure out that Chris Evans was the one who told the kidnappers where the North Pole was, so they abduct him and bring him to the North Pole where he sees things like trolls and talking bears, and is forced to accept that Santa Claus is real. He ends up getting roped into tracking down Santa, so the movie becomes a sort of buddy cop thing where Dwayne Johnson plays the serious tough guy Secret Service type with the personality of a rock, and Chris Evans plays the suave but cowardly criminal, and they have to work together despite their clashing personalities. Chris Evans somehow figures out who he was talking to on the phone at the seismic station, and they track him down to a beach where, after Dwayne Johnson beats up his bodyguards, they tell him to write the name of the person he works for in the sand because he isn't willing to say it out loud. But then Chris Evans, being an idiot, reads it out loud, and it turns out it's a witch from Icelandic folklore named Gryla, and she can hear her name being said from anywhere in the world, so she sends her minions, a bunch of big scary snowmen, to attack Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans. A fight ensues, and there's a moment where Chris Evans, who's just a normal human in this movie, gets tossed around and bashed into things, and this should have resulted in horrific bodily injuries, but he just gets up totally unfazed. Now, this might seem like a stupid thing to complain about in a movie about Santa Claus, but 1, it kind of kills the tension when you know the characters are essentially invincible because of plot armor, and 2, it reveals the cynical mentality of the filmmakers that everything has to be heightened and treated like a superhero movie, even when it isn't appropriate, for no reason other than it's what audiences have come to expect from these type of big dumb CGI spectacle movies, which you watch with your eyes glazed over, and I don't respect that. Anyway, they defeat the snowman, but the middleman guy they were talking to gets frozen, so they have to find another lead. Dwayne Johnson decides they have to go talk to Santa's evil brother Krampus, but the problem is Krampus and the North Pole have an agreement to not trespass on each other's property. So when they go there and predictably get caught because of Chris Evans' stupidity, Krampus explains that he used to date Gryla and tells them about a magical device resembling a snow globe called a Gloskafig, which traps people inside it. Chris Evans manages to talk Krampus into making a bet with them that if Dwayne Johnson can beat him in a slapping game, he will let him go. Using the magical armband thing that makes him super strong, Dwayne Johnson cheats and they escape. Outside, Chris Evans accidentally says Gryla's name again, and they drive away. While driving through the woods, they see a piano in the middle of the road with a present addressed to Chris Evans. Just then, Chris Evans gets a phone call from his kid whose life he's never been present in since he got divorced. The kid is mad at him for not going to a school concert thing and tells him to stop sending him presents while holding up another Gloskafig, which immediately traps him and teleports him somewhere. This prompts Chris Evans to grab the Gloskafig that was sent to him, and he also gets teleported. Chris Evans finds himself trapped in a snow globe on a shelf next to another snow globe with his kid in it, and Gryla shows up and explains her evil plan to use Santa's factory to mass-produce Gloskafigs, and use them and his magic to distribute them all over the world to trap all the naughty people, which, in her eyes, includes basically everyone on the planet. So I guess because Gryla considered Chris Evans a threat to her plans, she decided to capture him. But by this point, Chris Evans already knew what the Gloskafig was, so tricking him into touching one wouldn't have worked. So she instead got him to trap himself by trapping his kid, which he wouldn't have known about if his kid didn't happen to make a video call to him at the exact moment. So it's entirely because of coincidence that Gryla's plan worked. Anyway, Dwayne Johnson is in a video call with his boss and they somehow figure out what Gryla's plan is. and that Santa was never taken away from the North Pole. Back at Gryla's hideout, Chris Evans accidentally figures out that you can escape the Glaskafig by simply being nice, and he and his kid escape. It's not clear if Gryla knew it was this easy to escape the Glaskafig, but assuming her plan succeeded and she managed to capture every single human on the planet, at least one of those billions of people would have figured this out within minutes, just like Chris Evans did, and they would have told everyone else how to get out, so it turns out Gryla's plan is doomed to fail if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. And now the movie doesn't have any stakes. Anyway, Dwayne Johnson shows up, having somehow figured out exactly where to find them off screen. It turns out this is an old abandoned part of Santa's factory in the North Pole. They break some of Santa's friends out of a vault and go to the runway, where Gryla is preparing to take off in Santa's sleigh, with the unconscious Santa in the back, along with a big bin of Glaskafigs, which the movie tells us is supposed to be the number in the millions, even though there realistically couldn't be more than a few thousand visible. They jump out into the sleigh and it's about to take off, and they fight Gryla. But she's super strong and throws Chris Evans out in front of the sleigh, where he lands on the chains holding the reindeer together and manages to separate them, causing the sleigh to crash and Gryla to fall off the runway, which is like a mile off the ground for some reason. Dwayne Johnson wakes up Santa, but then Gryla comes climbing back up, having transformed into her true form, which is a giant troll thing with tentacles. Krampus shows up in his flying thing and helps fight her because he's decided he doesn't hate his brother anymore. And Santa calls the reindeer to fly up and knock Gryla around until she falls into a bin of Glaskafigs and gets trapped in one. Then the movie ends with Dwayne Johnson, Chris Evans, and his kid all riding the sleigh while Santa delivers presents on Christmas. So that's what happens in Red 1. What do I think of it? Well, it's not as bad as some critics are making it out to be. It's got some stupid things in it, but it's also got some imaginative stuff as well. Is this gonna go down as a holiday classic that kids will be watching 20 years from now? No. Is it worth paying $10 to $25 to see in a theater? No. Is it something you could put on it for background noise when your family comes over for Christmas? Yeah, I guess it's good for that, I suppose. I mean, it has a lot of swearing in it for no reason. It could have gotten a PG rating if they didn't do that, and maybe more people would have brought their kids to see it. But overall, it's mid, and you will forget you even saw it once it's over. It's a bunch of CGI noise. If you've seen any modern action movie, this is just another one with a Christmas skin on it. But that's really the worst thing a movie can be, isn't it? Just a middle-of-the-road waste of time that doesn't inspire any strong reaction. At least terrible movies sometimes gain some sort of notoriety. Will Red 1 be remembered? Will anyone be talking about it a week after all the YouTube reviewers have cashed in on it? So I guess that's all I have to say about Red 1. Here's a challenge to my audience. Tell me what you want for Christmas in the comments section. Whoever has the most unreasonable demand wins a used fruitcake. And don't forget to subscribe if you're not already. Check my channel for videos you may have missed since YouTube doesn't always tell you when I upload. Send me your fan art and support me on Patreon. The links are in the pinned comment. Bye.